Welcome to Weekly News Highlights, where we wrap up your week with a glimpse back into what went on over the past week. I'm Kim Dami in Seoul. President Yoon Suk Yeol was in the Netherlands this week for a state visit, also with a mission to upgrade the two nations' chip cooperation to a chip alliance. The Dutch semiconductor firm ASML opened its heavily controlled cleanroom manufacturing facilities to the South Korean leader, a first for any leader. The Federal Reserve kept interest rates steady for a third meeting and gave its clearest signal yet that its aggressive hiking campaign is over by indicating 3-quarter-point cuts in 2024. BTS Jungkook and Jimin on Tuesday entered a military recruit training camp to begin their mandatory military service. Now, with the two members' enlistment, all 7 members of the group will on a hiatus while they fulfill their military duty. South Korea and the Netherlands this week agreed to forge a semiconductor alliance during President Yoon Suk Yeol's state visit to Amsterdam. Hoping to maintain a so-called super gap in chips, President Yoon toured the global chip firm ASML. Our Oh Soo-young has this coverage.
South Korean and Dutch chip giants will jointly invest over $700 million to foster next-generation semiconductor technology and young specialists, as President Yoon Suk Yeol aims to solidify a semiconductor alliance with the Netherlands. On Tuesday, the South Korean leader visited the production facility of ASML, the world's biggest supplier of lithography machines, crucial for making semiconductors. Accompanied by Dutch King Willem-Alexander and the heads of Samsung and SK hynix, Lee Jae-yong and Choi Tae-won, Yoon oversaw the signing of 3 memorandums of understanding on developing cutting-edge microchips, which make up almost 20% of South Korea's exports.
ASML이 만들어낸 반도체 산업의 혁신은 인공지능, 5G, 모빌리티 등 4차 산업혁명의 강력한 동력이 되고 있습니다. 앞으로 한국 기업들과 긴밀히 협력해서 반도체 산업의 혁신과 글로벌 공급망 안정화를 위해 노력해 주시기를 기대합니다.
Samsung and ASML agreed to jointly invest some $763 million into an R&D center based in South Korea to develop ultrafine processing technology based on next-generation extreme ultraviolet or EUV lithography. Meanwhile, SK hynix also signed a deal with ASML to co-develop hydrogen recovery technology for EUVs, recycling rather than burning hydrogen to use as process gas. This is expected to reduce power usage by around 20% and save $12.5 billion in costs annually. Another MOU was reached between the Korean and Dutch governments to establish a chip academy for graduate students beginning in February, involving the two nations' top chip-related firms and institutions, including Samsung and ASML, to offer practical training with cutting-edge equipment and facilities.
Growing talent together and sharing know-how is something that only a true semiconductor alliance can do, and we expect that exchanges between future generations in the industry will become more active.
Yoon's economic secretary noted that the deals were inked as global foundries like Samsung, TSMC and Intel scramble to master the production of ultrafine 2nm chips, around 10 to 15 times faster than 3nm models, which were first mass-produced last year by Samsung. As their rivalry intensifies, he noted that the president toured ASML's cleanroom facility, featuring an advanced lithography machine which has never been shown publicly before. This, he said, casts optimistic prospects for South Korean firms looking to secure key materials and equipment to boost their chip-making capacity. Celebrating the budding cooperation, the South Korean leader and the Dutch king both signed a semiconductor wafer for display at the cleanroom facility. Yoon's office says the Semiconductor Alliance signifies two countries keeping a technological lead in chip technology, which influences all industrial fields and future economic security, and working together to overcome crises in the chip supply chain. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, Amsterdam.
And apart from their upgraded collaboration in the field of semiconductors, South Korea and the Netherlands share 6 decades of bilateral relations, which was highlighted at a state banquet hosted by the King on President Yoon's first full day in Amsterdam. Our Kim Do-yeon tells us more.
At the first state banquet for a South Korean president at the Royal Palace of Amsterdam on Tuesday, President Yoon Suk Yeol gave a special shout-out to the Dutchman that brought a special moment to all Koreans in recent history.
2002년 대한민국 국민들의 가슴을 뜨겁게 달군 월드컵 4강 신화의 중심에는 네덜란드 출신의 명장 거스 히딩크 감독이 계십니다. 어디 계십니까?
This was his way of showing that South Korea and the Netherlands share a deep relationship that goes beyond semiconductor cooperation. The diplomatic relationship was established more than 60 years ago, and the two countries last year upgraded the relationship to a strategic partnership. Also, he reminded everyone that the first Westerner to become naturalized to what at the time was the Joseon dynasty was a Dutchman, Jan Jans Veltevri, or in Korean, Pak Yeon. King Willem-Alexander also noted that South Korea has grown tremendously in just a couple of years, and Koreans and the Dutch are culturally connected.
The Republic of Korea is everywhere. There's Kpop on the radio, K-movies in the cinema, K-dramas on Netflix, and K-food in the supermarket.
Above all, the two leaders underscore the shared values that the two countries are based on, something that has become increasingly important with uncertainties around the world.
국제법 질서를 발전시켜야 할 의무를 헌법에 규정한 네덜란드야말로 규범 기반 국제 질서를 선도하고 있는 것입니다. 대한민국도 세계의 자유, 평화, 번영을 위해 책임과 기여를 다하는 글로벌 중추 국가로서 규범 기반 국제 질서의 강화에 힘을 쏟고 있습니다.
This comes as President Yoon started official engagements for the state visit on Tuesday at the welcoming ceremony at Dam Square in Amsterdam, which included a 21-gun salute and a greeting from Korean children. After heading inside the palace, the president and the Dutch king introduced their delegations, including Prime Minister Mark Rutte. Prime Minister Rutte, according to President Yoon himself, is one of the leaders most close to him on the global scene. And Yoon was accompanied by Rutte as he went to lay a wreath at the National Monument at the Dam to commemorate the Dutch war heroes. The official welcoming at the palace ended with a luncheon hosted by the king. There, President Yoon thanked the king for his hospitality, saying his state visit to South Korea in 2014, a first for a Dutch king, boosted the bilateral relationship back then, and his visit to the Netherlands is another milestone. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Trilateral defense cooperation, including the sharing of missile warning data in real time, may be imminent. 4 months after the leaders of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan reached an agreement at Camp David. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jong-sil reports.
South Korea, the U.S. and Japan will likely begin sharing real-time information on North Korean missiles in a few days. This is according to a White House official on Wednesday local time during a keynote speech at Washington, D.C.'s Brookings Institution. U.S. NSC Senior Director for East Asia and Oceania, Mira Rep Hooper, said, quote, "We're on track to make good on our promise to be sharing real-time missile warning data by the end of this year, and in fact, we expect that to be operational within the next few days." The announcement came 4 months after the leaders of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan met at Camp David back in August and decided to actively share more information on North Korea. Officials from the three countries have since been working to share real-time warning data. Pyongyang criticized the move in its official newspaper on Thursday. According to the Rodong Sinmun, it called the real-time data sharing a, quote, reckless military move, adding that it had the underlying sinister intention of seeking an opportunity for a war by invading North Korea. It also said the trilateral cooperation was also intended to check on China and Russia. A South Korean Unification Ministry official told reporters that the government found it regrettable that Pyongyang was blatantly criticizing legitimate security cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo amid its own provocations, such as developing illegal nuclear weapons that violated UN Security Council resolutions. The official urged Pyongyang to return to dialogue and break away from provocations and threats. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
The U.S. has imposed sanctions on Russian companies associated with Moscow's arms transfers from North Korea. In its new Russia sanctions package over its war in Ukraine, the U.S. State Department on Tuesday included 3 companies involved in the export of North Korean military goods. The firms named were Shipping Firm Ibex, Asia Shipping Holdings, and Asia Shipping Company. South Korea and the U.S. believe North Korea acquired space technology that was used in its military reconnaissance satellite launch in exchange. Also on Tuesday, the Treasury Department imposed sanctions on more than 150 individuals and entities linked to Russia's Ukraine war. That includes a South Korean national surnamed Lee, an alleged key procurement agent for AK Microtech, which is a Russia-based firm transferring foreign semiconductor technology to Moscow. The Federal Reserve wrapped up its last key policy meeting of 2023 with another rate freeze, giving its a clearer signal yet that its aggressive hiking campaign is over by indicating 3 rate cuts in 2024. Joining me is our economic correspondent, Shin-Young. Welcome back, Hayoung.
Great to be here, Dami.
So, Hayoung, the rate freeze was no surprise, right?
Right, Dami. As widely expected, the Fed has announced another rate freeze, keeping its key interest rates in the 5.25% to 5.5% range. And the decision was announced by the Fed on Wednesday following its last meeting of this year. And this is the 3rd consecutive time that the U.S. Central Bank has decided to keep the rates unchanged. And it has been grappling with inflation, leading to a series of rate hikes over the last year and a half. And after raising interest rates to the highest level in 20 years, last July, it has taken a breather since then. The latest decision is largely attributed to robust employment and a slowdown in inflation. Take a listen to what the Fed chairman had to say.
Inflation has eased from its highs, and this has come without a significant increase in unemployment. That's very good news.
Now we have to talk about the inflation. Inflation for last month also slowed. Could you elaborate on the latest figures?
Well, consumer prices in the U.S. slowed to a 5-month low in November, raising expectations that the Federal Reserve will hold interest rates steady at its latest policy meeting. And data from the U.S. Labor Department on Tuesday local time shows that in November, the Consumer Price Index, a key gauge of inflation, rose 3.1% from the previous year. And that's the lowest increase seen since June and was mainly due to a 2.3% drop in energy prices from a month earlier on falling gasoline prices. And consumer prices have been slowing after hitting 9.1% in June of last year. And Fed Chairman Jerome Powell acknowledged that the current level is likely at its peak, but emphasized that it's far too early to declare victory. Take a listen.
While we believe that our policy rate is likely at or near its peak for this tightening cycle, the economy has surprised forecasters in many ways since the pandemic. Ongoing progress toward our 2% inflation objective is not assured.
Now, what caught the market's attention this time is that the Fed has hinted rate cuts in the new year. Now, how many cuts and when will that actually start?
Well, the exact timing of rate cuts wasn't disclosed, but the Fed's forecast definitely indicated 3 possible cuts coming in 2024. An estimate for next year's interest rates was announced along with FOMC members' latest economic projection. The central bank has revised down its economic growth estimate for next year to 1.4% and also lowered the inflation rate to 2.4%. And the interest rate is expected to tick down to 4.6% next year. And this is a 0.75 percentage points decrease from the current level, hinting that the Fed may cut the rate by 1/4 percentage point 3 times in 2024. With this, expectations in the market have grown over a possible rate cut as early as the first quarter of next year. And following the Fed's announcement, U.S. stocks welcomed the news. The Dow Jones Industrial Average on Wednesday surged 1.4%, closing at a new record high. The S&P 500 rose by 1.37%, while the Nasdaq closed with a 1.38% gain.
Now, with the Fed signaling rate cuts, the South Korea Central Bank, the Bank of Korea, may be considering its own timing of rate cuts, but the rate gap between South Korea and the U.S. still remains the same, right?
Yes, you're right. The latest rate freeze means the key interest rate gap between South Korea and the U.S. still remains at 2 percentage points. And it didn't widen further, which means that any pressure on the BOK related to additional depreciation of the Korean won and the increased risk of foreign capital outflows has been alleviated. And one expert says the BOK needs a clear signal from the U.S. for it to consider rate cuts.
Bank of Korea may decide to cut the rates a bit earlier if they are sure that the U.S. will start cutting the rates. But again, because the Fed has not given a very clear signal on when they will start to lower the rates, it may take quite a while. If we see household debts increasing very quickly, then I don't think the Bank of Korea can afford to cut the rates, or at least not cut rates very quickly.
He added that considering the Fed's forecast of a 2.9% interest rate in 2026, the BOK may not be able to lower its rate in parallel with U.S. pace, as South Korea's benchmark interest rate is now at 3.5%.
Then how did the South Korean government react to the Fed's latest move this week?
Well, the government held an emergency meeting on Thursday to discuss the Fed rate freeze. And Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho said that the government will remain vigilant, addressing risks in vulnerable areas to prevent the escalation of market volatilities at the end of the year and the beginning of 2024. And meanwhile, according to the BOK's monetary policy report released on Thursday, due to a delayed slowdown in domestic inflation, the BOK will maintain its current restrictive policy stance to lower inflation to the target level of 2% and to keep a close eye on the rise in household debt.
Right, let's keep a close eye on the BOK's move in the next year. All right, Hyeon, thank you so much for the coverage today.
Always my pleasure.
The Korean financial authorities plan to inject some 38 trillion won, that's almost $30 billion, into Korea's rechargeable battery market over the course of 5 years. Now, the focus is to reduce dependence on key materials from other countries by fostering an ecosystem for recycling used batteries. An Sung-jin explains.
The South Korean government plans to inject some $29 billion into the rechargeable battery industry over the space of 5 years from 2024. Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho, in an emergency economic meeting on Wednesday, discussed ways to enhance industrial competitiveness in the rechargeable battery industry.
We plan to actively support facility investment in promising rechargeable battery companies and to develop core technologies such as all-solid-state batteries. We will also shorten the patent examination period from the current 21 months to 10 months by prioritizing rechargeable battery patents.
It also plans to foster an ecosystem for recycled batteries in order to reduce dependency on critical raw material supplies from abroad. Instead of treating used batteries as waste, the plan is to transform them into recyclable products if they meet the criteria. If recycled, some can be remanufactured for electric vehicles, while those that are difficult to reuse will be recycled by extracting only valuable metals such as lithium and nickel. The government estimated that if all used batteries were recycled, it would secure enough key minerals for 170,000 electric vehicles annually, which is half of what Hyundai and Kia produce in a year. To further stabilize the supply chain, the government will increase loans for related companies and support interest rate reductions for facility investment in North America in response to the Inflation Reduction Act. To support critical raw material reserves and prevent a supply chain crisis in the long term, it plans to invest in building storage facilities by 2026 to store lithium, cobalt, and other vital raw materials for rechargeable batteries. At the meeting, measures to combat shrinkflation or package downsizing were also discussed. Data from the Korea Consumer Agency found that nearly 40 items have been downsized over the past 1 year. The government will seek to make it necessary for sellers to show any dosage changes on product packaging and for them to indicate the unit price.
It will become mandatory to label any changes on goods. We plan to thoroughly check whether this is properly implemented through consumer agencies or reporting centers.
The government also pledged to pay close attention to inflation and amend relevant regulations if necessary. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
COP28 in Dubai eventually wrapped up with no agreement on phasing out fossil fuels. Instead, for the first time, countries agreed on the need to, quote, transition away from fossil fuels in energy systems. Lee Kyung-un explains what the deal is about.
A historic climate deal. Nations at the COP28 climate summit in Dubai agreed on transitioning away from fossil fuels. It is a first for a UN climate conference to produce such a deal, though it still stops short of including a long-demanded call for a phase-out of oil, coal, and gas.
We have language on fossil fuel in our final agreement for the first time ever.
The final consensus came after COP28 was extended beyond its official closing time of midday Tuesday due to intense overnight negotiations over the key sticking point, whether the text should include a call to phase down or phase out fossil fuels. Along with the final text transitioning away, nations also agreed on commitments to triple the capacity of renewables and double energy efficiency by 2030. Other progress was made in adaptation and finance, including the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund to support countries most vulnerable to climate change. The UN and EU largely celebrated the deal as a milestone achievement in global climate action.
I think this is a global turning point. For the first time, the world is committing to transition away from fossil fuels. So this has the potential to be the beginning of a new era. The post-fossil era.
They are a climate action lifeline, not a finish line. Now all governments and businesses need to turn these pledges into real economy outcomes without delay.
The decision also satisfied oil producers like Saudi Arabia, who've been advocating reducing carbon emissions rather than fossil fuel phase out. But it left island countries that are facing the direct impact of climate change dissatisfied, as well as developing countries that raised issues of equal responsibility. Lee Kyung-un, Arirang News.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky this week made another trip to Washington, D.C. to make a plea for much-needed military and economic aid. While President Biden said the U.S. would not abandon Ukraine in its war against Russia, there was still stern Republican opposition to extending war funding. Ian Jin with details.
On Tuesday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made his third visit to Washington since the start of the war in Ukraine 22 months ago. He met with members of Congress as well as President Joe Biden. The visit was Zelensky's in-person plea to save a $61 billion U.S. defense package for war-torn Ukraine. That package has been logjammed by Republicans on Capitol Hill. The Republican members of Congress want the Biden administration to make concessions on U.S. border security and immigration policy in exchange for the aid package. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson said the White House is asking for billions of dollars without a clear strategy for winning the war in Ukraine, and that more needs to be done to secure the U.S. homeland borders.
What the Biden administration seems to be asking for is billions of additional dollars with no appropriate oversight, no clear strategy to win, and none of the answers that I think the American people are owed. I have also made very clear from day one that our first condition on any national security supplemental spending package is about our own national security first.
Prior to his meeting on Capitol Hill, President Zelensky addressed the military audience at the National Defense University on Monday, where he expressed hope that he could still count on the U.S. for assistance.
Putin must lose. Must lose so that everyone else who sees Russia's war on Ukraine as his personal lecture at the so-called University of Aggression gets the message loud and clear. Putin must lose. His weapon against you right now is propaganda and disinformation, but if he sees a chance, he'll go further.
Standing alongside the Ukrainian leader at a White House press conference, President Biden vowed on Tuesday that neither he nor the American people would walk away from Ukraine, saying that allowing a Ukrainian defeat would mean Russian President Vladimir Putin and would-be aggressors everywhere would be emboldened. But there was a subtle but noteworthy shift in public messaging from the president. From his previous statement of a pledge for U.S. support for Ukraine as long as it takes, his message shifted to as long as we can. Speaking to reporters during a meeting with Zelensky in the Oval Office, President Biden announced he would be releasing $200 million in funding that's already been approved by Congress to help Ukraine with its defensive needs. While that's a small fraction of the $60 billion Biden hoped for Ukraine in a supplementary funding request, the $200 million can be released shortly. 이은진, Arirang News.
It was especially a bittersweet week for BTS armies, with Jungkook and Jimin joining the army for their mandatory military duty as the last two members of the group. In South Korea, all able-bodied men must serve in the military for at least 18 months. Now, these boys are seen as living legends, with a total of 6 of their songs topping Billboard. That is why there were calls for a possible military exemption for BTS because of their great achievements. But all 7 of them have enlisted themselves for military service, something they had always promised to do so. But not all hope is lost. BTS members have hinted they have things prepared for fans to enjoy while they are gone without giving too many specifics. South Korea's Defense Ministry also indicated at the National Assembly that they'll be given time to practice for performances and even opportunities to participate in events overseas. All 7 members renewed their contract with HYBE this September and will aim to come back on stage as a group in 2025, at least after June.
The group needs time to make a comeback after they return from the service. When we say we're hoping, it's not an unrealistic hope. We all have agreed to actively pour efforts to do that.
Now, even while they're gone, their tune Spring Day hit #1 on iTunes this week for the first time 6 years and 10 months since its release. That is all we have for this week. We thank you for watching Weekly News Highlights. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.